What's up, guys? Welcome back to episode 4 of Katson's Corner. This is the show on the Guilty as Charged feed where we talk about everything that's been going on in college football with an eye towards the draft, talking about some guys the Chargers might be taking once April rolls around. I've seen all the comments and everything of the first few episodes. A lot of you are asking, why are we talking about the draft this early? Why are we, and like some of you were happy with it because of the way that the season was going. I will probably get a lot more people that are a little bit angry and upset that we're talking about the draft in September when the Chargers just won a game and the season is no longer over. We are so back, as we all know. But the answer to that question, why we're talking about the draft this early, is because it is never too early to talk about the draft because the Chargers are already thinking about the draft. And we know this because the Charger scouts are going to college games every weekend. They're going and watching college football every single weekend. They're working on their big board. They're thinking about which guys they're going to draft come April. And so we're coming here every week to talk about some of those guys that they might have an eye on. That is why we're talking about the draft this early, because the Chargers are talking about the draft this early inside the building. So, without further ado, we're going to get to some prospects for this week. The Chargers went to 2 more games this week, so we're going to talk about some guys from there, kind of the standout guys from those schools. Before we do that, of course, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We have episodes coming out every single day with me, with Alex Insdorf, with Arjun, with Steven and Tyler, with everyone, every single day of the week coming to your feed. So make sure you are subscribed on YouTube so that you can get all of those videos. You guys know the deal. Do all the stuff, hit the bell thing or whatever. You know the deal. We're going to go ahead and talk about some players. And I think that these are the right slides, even though it says week 3. I think I didn't change it. It's week 4. Yes. Okay, great. So the Chargers went to 2 games. They went to kind of like not the 2 biggest games, but kind of what looked like they were going to be the 2 biggest games maybe coming into the season. Obviously, this week of college football had a ton of action going on. I think there were 6 different games that were between 2 ranked opponents. Including Notre Dame, Ohio State, which we'll talk about in a little bit, including Alabama versus Mississippi. We had Oregon State, Washington State. We had, all sorts of stuff all over the board. The Chargers were at Notre Dame, Ohio State. They sent 2 scouts there, actually. That was kind of the big game of the weekend. Dane Brugler from The Athletic, who is the premier draft guy as far as I see it, was talking about earlier in the week how that was kind of going to be a scouting convention of a game. I think there ended up being close to, I think it was 18 teams or something that went. Chargers were one of a couple teams that sent multiple people to that game. But they were also at Florida State Clemson, which was not a ranked versus ranked matchup because Clemson was not ranked coming into that game. Florida State ends up winning that game in overtime. Ohio State beats Notre Dame on the last play of the game on a run play where Notre Dame only had 10 players on the field. So some exciting action the Charger scouts got to see, and some pretty good performances from some big-time prospects that they got to see as well. We're going to start here with Florida State. We're going to talk about Jared Verse. You guys may have heard of Jared Verse at this point. He was a guy that a lot of us were talking about for the draft last season. Transferred in to Florida State from Albany. He was a high school tight end. Didn't have a to play football at the Division I FBS level. Decided to go to Albany. He moves to defensive end and was just absolutely dominant in the spring season in 2021. And so, if you guys remember, the 2020 season for FCS schools, which Albany is in, got canceled because of the COVID-19 pandemic. They played that season in the spring instead. So Verse played at Albany in the spring and in the fall, I believe, of 2021 for Albany. Just absolutely dominant those 2 seasons after redshirting in 2019. Transfers to Florida State ahead of the 2022 season. He was kind of a guy that was on scouting radars, but wasn't really being talked about as like, this guy's going to be a first round pick. It was just kind of like, this guy's a really good FCS player, and we're going to see how it goes now that he's at Florida State. And then he was dominant at Florida State last season. And a lot of people were expecting him to come out. It was a really strong edge class last season. We've kind of seen that borne out in the way that the draft went and in the way that those players are performing in the NFL so far. Shout out to Itulu Pelotu, who had 9 pressures on Sunday against the Vikings. That was wonderful. And so Verse, had a decision to make. He had second round feedback from the advisory board, and he said, "You know what? We have unfinished business at Florida State. Florida State convinced almost everyone from that team last season to return because they have national championship aspirations, they have ACC championship aspirations, and Verse has given multiple interviews where he basically said, like, yeah, I felt like the job wasn't done, so I came back." So he's back at Florida State this season. He's tearing it up again, and he's put himself in a position where he might be Edge 1 this season. It's kind of a lighter edge class this season, so he kind of played those cards right. He's kind of the top guy that we're talking about. Um, will probably end up being someone that goes before the Chargers are able to pick. But it's September, and there are still 7 months until the draft happens. And so anything is still possible. And so we're going to talk about Verse because the Chargers were at this game. There were a million other prospects that they could have been watching for as well. But it's hard for him to not catch your attention when you watch Florida State's defense. It just is. And beating up on a Clemson offensive line that is underperformed based on their recruiting rankings, but is still like a very good college offensive line. Like that only helps you from a draft perspective. So you see the notes on the side there. We kind of touched on a lot of those things. It was a little bit of a surprise that he came back, like I said, but unfinished business thing and everything. That's going to really endear him to NFL teams too when he does interviews and stuff. It just shows what a locker room like team guy he is. So culture fit with the Chargers, who've kind of tried to establish that their team is full of those guys. In doing my research on him coming into this video, I was reading some of Dane Brugler from the Athletics stuff on him from this summer, and Daniel Jeremiah from NFL Network, who's another fantastic draft analyst. And Jeremiah this summer actually compared him to Ryan Kerrigan. If you remember Kerrigan from the Washington teams of kind of like the early to mid 2010s. And I think it's a really good comparison. Kerrigan was a little bit bigger than Verse is, but both of them just win with like power and motor and effort, and like they're just like chasing down plays on the backside. A lot of their sacks just come from pure effort plays where like they're on the opposite side, and the court, if they're lined up on the right side of the formation, the quarterback scrambles left and they're chasing them down all the way across the field and making that play. And so I definitely see that comparison. I think that's a good one. But Verse is also very fast. He's a great athlete. I believe he was clocked at close to 21 miles an hour last season. He's on the Feldman's Freaks list, which is like the list of the top 100 athletes in college football that comes out every summer for the Athletic. So fantastic athlete. He's going to test really well. He's going to interview really well. Like I said, I don't know if he's going to be available at the Chargers' first round pick. We'll see how the rest of the season goes. But if he is, this is someone that you can pair with Tui Pelotu and kind of immediately have the top end edge tandem that you've had the last few seasons with Joey Bosa and, whether it was Khalil Mack or Uchenna Nwosu or, whoever, Melvin Ingram even, like kind of continue that tradition that the Chargers have had of having two very, very good edge rushers. I think that Verse steps in immediately. And with the way that Tuli is looking, like he's stepped in immediately and looked like that guy. And so, especially with the reports that Daniel Popper of The Athletic thinks that the Mike Williams ACL injury is not necessarily the end of his tenure with the Chargers. If that's the case, it kind of seems like maybe both Bosa and Mack are gone after this season because the Chargers have to get under the cap somehow. And so if that's the case, then like edge round 1 is definitely something they could be looking into. I think Verse is a super good candidate for that if he's available at the Chargers pick. Moving over to Clemson, we're going to talk about corner Nate Wiggins, who did get injured in this game. It was in the fourth quarter. Looked like a pretty nasty injury. He had to be helped off the field. Wasn't really putting a lot of weight on his leg. Turned out to just be a bone bruise. Dabo Swinney said like pretty much the best case outcome for him, but he's still going to be week to week here over the next couple weeks as Clemson really gets into the thick of conference play. And so that's something to watch for. But Wiggins is a guy that Dan Brugler really likes. He was his number 12 overall player in the top 50, which was pretty surprising to me because he was not really a guy that had popped onto my radar until I saw that. Wiggins is a true junior. He played a little bit as a freshman, played a little bit more as a sophomore, was kind of up and down as a sophomore, and now he's like blossomed into a full-time starter as a junior. And the reason that Brugler is so high on him is just because he's such a good athlete. He's an incredible athlete. He's got the height that you want at corner. I think he's 6'2". He's got the length that you want. He's got speed. He's a beautiful route mirror. Like just excellent in short area, like incredible quickness, incredible route discipline, just like sticks to guys no matter what. Like there's nothing that you can do to shake free of him. It's really remarkable on tape. Um, has really high end ball skills. He led Clemson in pass deflections, I think, last season with 12, which is almost one a game, which is insane for any corner, really, even if you're getting thrown to a whole bunch. He does struggle with physicality a little bit. I think you saw a little bit of that in the Florida State game because they have two of the most physical receivers in college football between Keon Coleman, who's just a power forward playing wide receiver, and Johnny Wilson, who is literally 6'7". And so he was a little bit up and down in that game. I thought struggles a little bit with that physicality because he's super slender. I think he's going to need to add some bulk to stick in the NFL, at least on the outside. And anytime that you're talking about an athlete adding bulk, you're also a little bit worried of like, well, that remarkable short area quickness, like, is that going to maintain itself if he gets a little bit bigger? And so that's something to keep in mind as well. And then also just in run support, again, because he's a little bit of a lighter, smaller player, he does tend to get washed out in run support a little bit. He's not the most willing participant in run support. He's a little bit more hesitant to get his nose in the action, not like one of these guys from the nickel that's just like torching their way into the backfield and racking up tackles for loss. He's much more of a cover corner, likes to play off man, likes to play zone. He's kind of like a cover 3 corner type guy. Um, but I really like him since I've gotten a chance to study him after seeing that Brugler is that high on him. I think that he's someone definitely to keep an eye on in the back end of the first round as this corner class starts to kind of sort itself out. There are three to five guys I think that can all we could put in that first round conversation. We're going to talk about another one of them here in just a minute. We talked about another one last week with Kalen King from Penn State. So if you're interested in that, you can always go back and watch last week's video. But yeah, there's a ton of guys in that corner class. I think it's going to be kind of like all fighting for like mid to late first round picks. And so like that should be the position the Chargers should be drafting in if the season goes according to plan. And corner, I think, is definitely on the menu, especially with the way that JC Jackson's whole situation is playing out right now, which, we're still waiting for a few details on in terms of like what's going on with all of that. And Michael Davis just, not playing up to the level that he did last season on that expiring contract. I think corner is definitely something to keep in mind for this draft. We're going to move to Notre Dame, Ohio State now. This is the third time that the Chargers have gone to a Notre Dame game this season. So I am running out of Notre Dame players to talk about. We've talked about Cam Hart before, the corner who fits literally every thing that the Chargers look for in a corner under Tom Telesco and Brandon Staley. Now, I know some of you are like, well, that regime's not going to be here when the draft rolls around, so what does it matter? The scouts aren't going to leave. Even if the staff, like the front office and the coaching staff and stuff turns over, scouting staff almost never turns over, at least not until after the draft. And so the fact that they're still visiting Notre Dame this many times or this early in the season, even if you think that those guys aren't going to be like that, those two guys in particular aren't going to be in the building by the time the draft rolls around, doesn't matter because all of those scouts that are on these field trips are still going to be in that building. They're still going to have all of these notes. They're going to be taking these notes like they're drafting for this team as it's currently constructed. So the 3 trips to Notre Dame are notable. Obviously, it's notable because Tom Telesco loves to draft Notre Dame players, but it's also notable because like there's a lot of good players on Notre Dame's team. We've talked about Hart 2 weeks in a row. I didn't want to talk about him a third time because what more is there to say? So instead, we're going to talk about running back Audric Estime, who I think we talked about the first time the Chargers went and visited Notre Dame. Estime has had a great season through 4 games. He leads the FBS in missed tackles forced. He's got 28 through 4 games, which is 7 a game. He's forcing 7 missed tackles a game. Insane. It's insane what he's doing. Um, he's more of a power back, but he still has above average speed. I think he's going to run probably in like the high 4.4s, low 4.5s, which is like pretty good, but not great. He's listed at 5'11", 227. If you see that picture of him there and you look up pictures of him and stuff, he's just shredded. Just like huge shredded dude, like looks like he's a between the tackles running back. I think that his vision is pretty decisive, but he has a weird tendency to bounce runs to the outside a lot, which is strange because Notre Dame's offensive line is really good. And if he just followed those blocks and got what he could get up the middle, like he would get a lot of yards. And he does do that on occasion, but there's a lot of times where he wants to hit a home run. And so he bounces the run outside. And a lot of times he's fast enough and agile enough to get to the corner and beat that guy outside. And so it works for him in college. Don't know if it's going to work for him in the NFL. But once he does get moving north and south, it's a runaway train. It's not moving laterally whatsoever, and it is running through you. And so a lot of those missed tackles forced, I would wager, are not like on jukes and that sort of thing. They're on stiff arms, they're on trucks, they're on like you can't arm tackle me sort of deal. Because once he gets moving downhill, like it is downhill, downhill. He's not going to juke someone out and like restart that acceleration. Like he gets up to speed and then he's at that speed and he runs forward until you get him down. Um, he's not really super involved in the pass game, whether as a blocker or a receiver. I think that he's probably going to be better as a pass blocker than as a receiver, just because he has the frame for it. He has the physicality for it. He's I I can't really speak to like the way that his hands are and everything because they just don't throw him the ball. They just don't. And so it's gonna be a question mark. Anytime that a running back has that sort of thing in the modern era, you're pretty much locking them into like third round is the ceiling. So we're talking about like third, fourth, maybe fifth round, kind of the sweet spot for where the Chargers like to take running backs. But also, there's potential that he goes back to school. Estime's a junior. Wasn't really on radars coming into this season, like he was because he's Notre Dame starting running back, but he also like he didn't get a spring grade from the scouting services that the NFL runs. He didn't like he's not on any of the watch lists or anything for the All-Star games, mostly because those are for seniors and stuff. Like he's kind of a late riser ish. And so there's plenty of reasons why he would go back and do another year. With running backs, it's a little bit dicey because a lot of those one-year wonder guys do end up coming out after their junior season just to get in the NFL as soon as possible. But we always see some of those guys go back to school as well. So something to keep an eye on there. All right, moving over to the Ohio State side, we're going to talk about Denzel Burke, who's another one of those 3 to 5 corners that we mentioned at the when we were talking about Nate Wiggins. Another one of those guys who's kind of in that first round sort of contention range. Burke is a guy who he came into Ohio State, he put a ton as a true freshman. He's a 4-star recruit, which is obviously phenomenal, but like not anything particularly special for Ohio State. Honestly, when I was looking it up, I was almost certain that he was a 5-star recruit just because like he was playing as a true freshman for Ohio State. But no, he was a 4-star recruit. He's from Arizona originally. Went to Saguaro High School. Shout out Cole Topham, who works there now. One of my friends from Chargers Wire, who's moved on and is an assistant coach there now. But Burke had a really, really good freshman year. He had I think it was 12 passes defensed as a freshman, looked like every bit of an NFL corner, like looked like he was going to be the next guy at corner in college football. And then last season, just struggled. He had some injuries, was a little bit inconsistent because of those, and partially just because of the way that Ohio State season kind of went. Just everything was kind of just a little bit more difficult for them on defense last season. Struggling with some of those injuries, just kind of like banged up here and there. Didn't really have a great season, was kind of like coming into the season of like, well, now we don't really know who Denzel Burke is, because freshman year, he looks phenomenal. Sophomore year, he looks kind of okay. He's kind of banged up the whole time. And this year, he's come back and he's looked like freshman year Denzel Burke. He's already got 6 passes defense this season. He does only have 1 interception, which is only his 2nd career interception, which is weird for a guy that played wide receiver in high school. You'd expect a little bit more ball production there. But what are you going to do? As they say, there's a reason they play DB. He's a super, super advanced disciplinarian with his eyes. He does not get baited by quarterbacks ever. Really like stays in his zone, makes sure that like he's not creeping into his teammate zones. Like it is not gullible whatsoever, and has one of the quickest closes in the class. And so like if you're throwing it to someone that's in his zone and he's not there, by the time the ball gets there, he's there. And so, part of that might be why he doesn't have as much interception production, because he's just getting there as the ball gets there and just knocking it out of a guy's hands. And so maybe you want to see that be a tick faster so that he can jump those routes and take them to the house. But again, there's always going to be things to work on. These are young players. Is a little bit unrefined as a technician. There's some footwork stuff that I'd like to see him clean up. He opens his hips pretty early on reps a lot of the time, and he's a little bit slow to turn his head. Kind of just sticks his arm in there when he sees the ball is there. Doesn't really get his head around. Leads to a lot of penalties because he gets called for PI basically for just making contact with the receiver. All right. So going into next week, we have another batch of games to talk about, some prospects that I am going to be watching this week, primarily on Saturday, although the Utah-Oregon State game is, I think, on Friday. And so just want to run through some of these guys for you, give you guys a little taste of what to watch for this week in college football upcoming. Obviously, we'll review it next week as well. So Utah-Oregon State is a ranked matchup. Utah's number 10. Oregon State, I think, is down to number 19 after losing to Wazoo. Jonah Ellis for Utah has been everywhere this season. It seems like every single play he's in the backfield. He had 2 consecutive sacks in Utah's game last week. Has just been phenomenal as a guy that like wasn't really, I don't think, expected to be a starter necessarily. Utah's obviously been dealing with some injuries on the defensive line, and so it's been kind of wonky. But Ellis has been fantastic. He's got brothers that play in the NFL. Caden Ellis is a linebacker for the Falcons. He's got a brother, Noah Ellis, who was on the Eagles for a little bit. So NFL bloodlines. His dad played in the NFL. He's been great this season. I'm really interested to see how he stacks up against Oregon State's offensive tackles. Both of those guys got mid-round feedback this spring from the advisory board. Joshua Gray is the one that I like better. He's the left tackle. And then Talisi Fuaga is their right tackle. I think he's probably a guard in the NFL, but both of them are stellar. Oregon State has one of the best offensive lines in the country. And so I'm really interested to see how Ellis performs in that game because he's only a junior. And so there's still room for him to come back. But also, like, if he keeps on this pace, like, he's probably going to declare, and he's probably going to be a guy in this class. Because we talked about when we were talking about Jared Verse, his edge class is not as strong as last year's was. And so some of these junior guys like really popping off like Ellis, really kind of round out that class. And so I'm interested to see how that goes. On Saturday, we've got Kansas versus Texas in another ranked matchup. Kansas 4-0, Texas 4-0. Kansas is one of the most fun teams in America. If you've not watched some Kansas football since Lance Leipold got there, I beg you to turn this game on. It's going to be on national TV. You'll be able to find it. Kansas is so much fun. They have a running back I really like, Devin Neal. He's a little bit more of like a big play running back. He's a super, super fun guy. Their offense is super hard to evaluate, so I'm not really sure where Neal fits in NFL wise. Kansas runs kind of like a modified option offense with there's some really cool designs in there and stuff, but it's just like not super translatable to the NFL because it's just like nothing that anyone in the NFL runs. But him and Jaden Daniels are one of the best backfields in America. I'm really interested to see how Neal does against this Texas defense. Texas has a linebacker, Jalen Ford, who's kind of like the prototypical modern linebacker, can cover the pass, but can also trigger down and stop the run, is going to still be on the field in dime packages. Jim Nagy, the executive director of the Senior Bowl, just had a tweet about him today of like, this is like what linebacker looks like in 2023. And so he's someone that's on their radar and therefore should be on your radar as well. So interested to see how he holds up against a pretty potent Kansas rushing attack in a game that I think should be really, really good. A little bit later, we've got Iowa State, Oklahoma. Originally, I had LSU, Mississippi on here, but I've talked about both those two teams at length this season so far. So changing it up a little bit. There's a couple prospects to watch here. I think all of them are kind of day three guys. Iowa State's got a corner, TJ Tampa, who is pretty much their only like draft relevant starter that didn't get suspended for gambling. But he's pretty good. He's going to have his hands full with a pretty potent offensive attack for Oklahoma. He's a guy that got, I think it was third or fourth round feedback from the advisory board, but is kind of slipped down boards. He's getting, he has to do a lot because there's not a ton of talent left on that Iowa State defense. But someone to keep an eye on. I like him a little bit. And then Oklahoma's got an edge rusher, Ethan Downs, who's had a pretty good start to his season. Probably a day three guy as of right now, but I'm pretty sure he's only a junior as well. So plenty of time for him to come back. Kind of the same as Ellis. Just want to see if he kind of continues producing as we get later into the season because it's a potential underclassman declaration. And then there's also the tight end, Austin Stogner. He's been there for a little while. Took a year off to go play at South Carolina and then came back. Just kind of a more of like an H-back move tight end type guy. 6th-year senior, has been around for a long time. Probably a day three pick. Kind of reminiscent of like Grant Calcaterra, but without the concussion issues. Calcaterra's on the Eagles now. Kind of they played together at Oklahoma, so that's actually funny. But Stogner is kind of a similar guy to that. Probably will be a late round guy, make a name on special teams and stuff. Maybe get in a few plays on offense and just kind of be tasked with blocking linebackers and that sort of thing. And then I have to shout out my guys at Washington, Sco Dogs. We've got Washington versus Arizona at 7 o'clock. This game is on the Pac-12 network, so it's going to be hard to find. But if you want the Chargers to draft more receivers, obviously the Mike Williams injury we talked about. Josh Palmer has not been super great to start the season. Keenan Allen's been phenomenal, of course. But like if you want to add some more juice to that receiver room with Quentin Johnston next year, this is where you should start. Washington's got 5 future NFL players at wide receiver, I think. I try to stay unbiased when I talk about my Huskies, but it gets hard. But there's definitely at least 3, and it's Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk. McMillan missed the Cal game last week with an injury, but it sounds like he should be back for this game. Washington has the best offense in the country, and so if nothing else, you should watch this game just to watch this offense operate. Michael Penix has been dealing. Odunze is firmly in the wide receiver 2 conversation. McMillan is a day 2 guy. Jalen Polk, I will go to my grave saying that he's a day 2 guy as well, but he's kind of been the one that's gone under the radar because everyone knows Odunze and McMillan's names. But Polk has been phenomenal this season as well. And then on the other side, Arizona's got a pretty good receiver, Jacob Cowing, who transferred in from UTEP prior to last season. I really like him as well. 5th-year senior guy, is kind of the number 2 there, I would say. They've got another guy, Tetaroa McMillan, who's a true sophomore, who I'm sure is already on draft radars everywhere because he's phenomenal and he's going to be a top guy next season. But didn't put him on here because he's not eligible for this year. But yeah, that entire game, like every receiver in that game is going to play in the NFL. And so if you're looking for receiver help, whether it's 2024 or 2025 or whenever it is, like you should start with Washington, Arizona. So watch that game if you can. Obviously, Pac-12 network, so you might have to stream it using questionably legal methods. But if you can get it, you should watch it. It's at 7 p.m. on Saturday night. All right. That's going to do it for this week, guys. Hope you enjoyed, as always. Yeah, if there's any prospects that you want me to talk about in particular, there's some guys that popped out to you, drop them in the comments. I'll go through them, see if there's some guys that I have some notes on to share next week and going forward. But excited for another week of college football, excited for another week of Chargers football. We got the Raiders this week. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, I will catch you guys later. Peace.